Hey darlings, welcome back to the channel. It's Ava. You know, I've sat in this chair and read hundreds of emails from you guys. Stories of shattered vows, gaslighting, and the sheer, unadulterated audacity of men. Usually, when a woman catches her husband cheating, the instinct is to scream, cry, or drag the mistress by her extensions. But today's story, oh, honey, this is a masterclass in letting the trash take itself out. Our protagonist, Raven, gets a second lease on life, and instead of trying to save a marriage that was already rotting from the inside, she simply hands her husband the shovel and watches him dig his own grave. Let's dive into the absolute best moments of this glorious, cold-blooded chess match. Raven, can you please stop overreacting? You know perfectly well that Mia is Liam's sister. I've been looking out for her at the office as a courtesy to Liam, my business partner. There is absolutely nothing between us. You are being completely unreasonable. Ethan's voice, dripping with impatience and defensiveness, exploded in my ears like a bucket of ice water, violently yanking my consciousness back from the abyss. My eyes flew open. I was staring at the living room of our luxury downtown apartment. Ethan stood by the sofa, tugging irritably at his expensive silk tie, his face a billboard of annoyance. I froze. I was certain of it. I had been reborn. I was back on the exact day I first discovered the suspicious closeness between Ethan and the company's new intern, Mia. In my previous life, in this very same scene, I'd confronted him after catching them looking far too cozy on the street. Then, I'd given him the most serious warning I could, the secret about my family, Ethan. I told you this when we took our vows at the church. The women in my family carry an ancient oath. Once married, if the husband betrays the marriage, the oath becomes a curse. The betrayer will be struck with an incurable illness and won't survive 6 months. In my previous life, Ethan didn't just scoff. He flew into a rage. He accused me of being a control freak, said I was using some medieval voodoo nonsense to curse him. That day, we had the worst fight of our entire marriage. Back then, Ethan was probably still just teetering on the edge of an emotional affair, which is why I'd tried to save things. We'd met in college, dated for 5 years before tying the knot. For 2 years, I thought we were the most enviable power couple in the city. To protect my marriage, I started showing up at his creative marketing agency unannounced. I thought I'd won, until I watched him walk into Mia's studio apartment in the dead of night. When I filed for divorce, Ethan showed his true colors. We lived in a community property state, and when his company had been on the brink of bankruptcy, it was my grandmother's substantial trust fund that had pulled it back from the edge. A divorce meant he'd be stripped to the bone, possibly even lose control of the company. Keep everything for himself. He tampered with my car. The moment the brakes failed, the car shot off the overpass, and I plunged into endless darkness. After death, my wandering spirit watched him stand at my funeral with his arm around Mia, shedding crocodile tears. But fate dealt me a new hand. This time, looking at this man scrambling to cover his tracks, mouth full of lies, I crushed the rage that screamed to tear him apart. I would not warn him about the curse again, and I would absolutely not ask for a divorce. I would watch him walk, step by step, into the abyss of his own destruction. Then, as his surviving widow, I would legally and rightfully inherit everything he owned. I took a deep breath, adjusted the muscles in my face, and shifted my expression from shock to something softer, a touch of guilt, a hint of tenderness. I softened my voice and said words that were the polar opposite of what I'd said in my previous life. Honey, I am sorry. Please don't be upset. I've just been so stressed lately. I didn't know Mia was Liam's sister. When I saw you paying so much attention to an intern, I just spiraled. If she is your partner's sister, of course you'd look out for her. Why would I ever doubt you?" Ethan froze. He'd clearly loaded up an arsenal of counterattacks and accusations, fully expecting a fight. He never saw the white flag coming. The irritation on his face crumbled instantly, replaced by a flicker of hidden guilt and unmistakable relief. He walked over and gently pulled me into his arms, his voice turning impossibly tender. "I am glad you understand. Raven, we've been together all these years. Don't you know how I feel about you? You are the only one. How could I possibly have eyes for anyone else?" Leaning against his shoulder, my stomach churned with nausea. Having lived through his murder of me, I knew his heart better than anyone. It was packed with greed, selfishness, and ice. He might not be plotting to kill me yet, but the moment his interests were threatened, he wouldn't hesitate to drag me straight to hell. From that day on, I stopped asking about Ethan and Mia. I gave him absolute freedom and trust. Sure enough, with my silent permission, their relationship escalated faster and more brazenly than it had in my previous life. Ethan started staying out all night with increasing frequency, armed with excuses like pulling an all-nighter on a campaign deck or entertaining clients at a bar downtown. On his credit card statements, cleverly disguised, but not cleverly enough, I could still trace the limited edition handbags and fine jewelry he'd bought for Mia. There was even a time he flew to the West Coast on a business trip, claiming he was bringing the intern along for exposure. In reality, he and Mia spent the entire weekend in the same luxury ocean view suite. On the surface, I played the role of the doting, attentive wife. Behind the scenes, I hired the city's most elite and most discreet private investigator to monitor their every move. And what the pie brought me went far beyond Ethan's affair. That expensive investigation report exposed a stomach, turning secret between Mia and her so-called brother Liam. The photos the pie slapped on the table were crisp enough to be movie stills. Mia was indeed Liam's sister, but they shared zero blood. Mia was the daughter of Liam's father's second wife, brought into the family from a previous relationship. Even more shocking, these step-siblings had been carrying on a deeply twisted, clandestine affair. The photos showed Liam sneaking into Mia's apartment multiple times late at night, not leaving until the next morning, looking distinctly disheveled. Several others captured them in a dimly lit parking garage, going at it in Liam's SUV like teenagers at prom. The logic chain snapped shut in my mind instantly. A girl like Mia, fresh out of college, no connections, no background, landing on a core project team and zeroing in on Ethan with surgical precision. That was all Liam, the good buddy, pulling strings from behind the curtain. As the company's number 2, Liam had always resented Ethan's iron grip on power. He deliberately planted his young, beautiful, expertly manipulative stepsister at Ethan's side to collect leverage, and ultimately to siphon off and seize the company's assets that belonged to Ethan, which really meant they belonged to me. "What a show," I murmured, flipping through the photos with a cold laugh. If they'd only wanted to use Ethan as an ATM, I might have just grabbed some popcorn and watched. But they made the fatal mistake of going after the company. This agency was something I'd poured real money and real sweat into saving. It belonged to me and me alone. I locked the evidence in a safe deposit box at the bank and bided my time. I held non-voting equity in the company and had a seat on the advisory board. But I'd rarely set foot in the office. I'd wanted to let Ethan save face. Now, to position myself for a seamless takeover down the road, I needed to reclaim my territory. When I started showing up at company headquarters regularly, dressed in couture business wear, heels clicking on marble, Ethan was visibly unsettled. "Why do you keep coming to the office? Are you still suspicious about me and Mia?" One afternoon, Ethan cornered me in his private office, voice low, his tone a bluff wrapped in offense. Classic gaslighting. He was the guilty one, yet somehow I was supposed to feel bad. I took an elegant sip of my coffee and smiled at him. "What are you thinking, sweetheart? I told you I trust you, and I meant it, 100%. There is a major PR account that specifically asked to meet with me, and I am just using the office as a meeting space." "What? You don't want me helping you make money?" The moment he heard major account, the suspicion in Ethan's eyes evaporated, replaced by a businessman's sharp-eyed greed. "Of course not, babe. I am thrilled you are getting back in the game." He exhaled with relief. But someone out in the open office area was seething with jealousy. Mia's hostility toward me was practically leaking out of those perpetually innocent eyes. Sure, she'd successfully snagged Ethan, but at the office, she was still just a dirty little secret of an intern. I, on the other hand, was the rightful boss's wife, polished, respected, the investor. That gaping chasm drove the young hothead to constantly pick fights with me one afternoon. I walked into the break room to brew a cup of Earl Grey and found Mia making coffee. She was wearing a silk blouse that looked casual, but cost a fortune. I recognized it. Ethan had charged it last month. When Mia spotted me, she spun around as if on cue, and oh so accidentally walked straight into me with a scalding cup of coffee. Oh no! Brown liquid splashed across my cream-colored hand, tailored blazer, leaving a glaring stain. Mia clapped her hand over her mouth, eyes instantly brimming with tears, voice trembling with panic, a startled little fawn. "Oh my God! I am so sorry, Raven. I really didn't mean to. I am such a klutz." That helpless, terrified act. If any unsuspecting male colleague had walked in, they'd have thought I, the wicked boss lady, had just slapped her across the face. I laughed inside. She wanted to provoke me. She wanted me to lose it right there in the break room, like some shrieking harpy, so she could run crying to Ethan about how cruel I was, deepening his resentment toward me. Too bad. She picked the wrong woman. I didn't flinch, didn't even furrow a brow. I pulled a napkin from the dispenser, dabbed my jacket with effortless grace, and offered a perfectly magnanimous smile. "It is fine, Mia. I know you are a bit clumsy. Everyone fumbles sometimes." My voice was warm, almost maternal. "It is just a jacket. Don't give it a second thought. Go on, get back to work." Mia stood there, frozen solid. Every rehearsed line died in her throat. She stared at me like I'd just stepped off a spaceship. What happened? The commotion drew colleagues from outside. Ethan came over too. He frowned at the stain on my jacket. The moment Mia saw Ethan, those dewy eyes filled right up with tears, lips parting, ready to launch into her victim routine. I beat her to it, breezy as a Sunday morning. "It is nothing, Ethan." Mia slipped a little and spilled her coffee on me. Poor thing was so scared she kept apologizing. I already told her it is no big deal. Don't be hard on her. Several colleagues stood around with water cups, watching. Every pair of eyes in that room was sharp. My composure and grace instantly made Mia look like a clumsy, careless office rookie. With an audience, Ethan couldn't exactly rush to Mia's defense. He put on his boss face and gave her a curt reprimand. "Be more careful. Stop being so careless. Watch it next time." "Yes, sir." Mia bit her lip, swallowing her fury, looking like she might draw blood. That afternoon, Ethan left early, claiming he had a meeting with a media vendor. I knew exactly where he was going, to comfort his wounded little mistress. When I ran into Mia in the lobby at the end of the day, her eyes still showed traces of crying, but the look she gave me carried a victor's smugness and defiance. She was still so young, so fresh out of school. She hadn't learned to hide her emotions. I returned a smile, devoid of warmth, turned, and walked to my car. Let them have their fun. By my calculations, the irreversible curse had already begun quietly taking root inside Ethan's body. But Mia's little games were far from over. She seemed to have a compulsive need to perform. Even with Ethan showering her with affection in private, she couldn't resist asserting herself in front of me, as if she could only confirm her victory in this love triangle by watching me hurt or rage. A few days later, around noon, I was heading to a nearby restaurant for lunch when I spotted Ethan and Mia stepping out of his car in the parking garage. One after the other, they'd clearly just come back from somewhere together. There was a faint lipstick smudge on Ethan's collar, and Mia's hair wasn't nearly as polished as it had been that morning. The instant I appeared in their line of sight, Mia let out a theatrical little "oh," as if she'd stepped on something, and her body pitched helplessly toward Ethan. Ethan instinctively caught her by the waist. Under the dim garage lights, the tableau was as loaded as a frame from a K-drama. But the second Ethan saw me, his face changed. He dropped his hands like he'd touched a hot stove, even stumbled back a step to put distance between them. Mia, cool as ever, steadied herself, and then in a voice loud enough for the entire garage to hear, rushed to explain, "Raven, please don't get the wrong idea. Ethan and I mean, the boss and I, there is nothing going on. I just twisted my ankle and he caught me, that is all." Her mouth said, "Don't misunderstand." Her eyes said, "Please do." I sighed internally. Acting this bad wouldn't even land her a background role on a soap opera. I put on a smile so genuine, it was bulletproof, my tone as light as discussing the weather. "Look at you," all flustered Mia. "I am not some unreasonable person. I saw what happened. You twisted your ankle and Ethan helped you. Honestly, if he'd just stood there watching you fall without lifting a finger, I'd think he had no manners at all." I even walked over and bent down to check her ankle with concern. "Does it hurt? Want me to grab an ice pack from upstairs?" A flash of visible disappointment and defeat crossed Mia's face. Her carefully staged showdown had been deflected with the lightest touch, transformed into a wholesome little workplace courtesy moment. Seeing zero suspicion from me, Ethan's tense shoulders visibly relaxed. He cleared his throat and offered a deliberately casual explanation. "Just came back from a client meeting, ran into Mia on the way. She was out on an errand, so I gave her a ride back." I smiled and nodded, the picture of trust. But Mia wasn't about to quit. Over the following days, she doubled down. In common areas, she'd loudly discuss project proposals whenever Ethan walked by, then gush in an adoring voice, "You are so brilliant," boss eyes full of stars. At team dinners, she'd happen to sit next to Ethan, pouring his water, serving his food, attentive as a personal assistant. Aunts, a colleague, even spotted her leaving Ethan's private office with red-rimmed eyes, as if she'd been crying, while Ethan sat inside with a deeply furrowed brow. These details seeped, drop by drop, into the office gossip radar. Break room whispers began to spread. Speculation about the boss and that pretty intern burned through the office like wildfire. Then Mia came to put on another show for me. She knocked on the door of the conference room I'd been using. Eyes red, face full of grievance, voice trembling with carefully calibrated distress. "Raven, there seem to be rumors going around the office about me and the boss having some kind of inappropriate relationship. I am really scared." I swear there is absolutely nothing between Ethan and me. He is only nice to me because of my brother Liam. If it makes you uncomfortable, I'll resign." When she said, "Resign," her tone carried a clear subtext. "Faith, you actually let me leave. You are the petty one." Asterisk. I set down my papers, stood, walked over to her, and even handed her a tissue. My voice was as warm as a big sister's. "Mia, don't overthink this. Of course I know Ethan looks after you because of his friendship with Liam. Don't worry. I'll talk to Ethan and ask him to be a little more mindful about boundaries at the office, so those rumors don't damage your reputation. For a young woman, reputation matters." Mia's expression froze. She never expected that I wouldn't just not be provoked. I'd actually offer to protect her reputation. This was not in her script. She opened her mouth, struggled for a moment, and finally managed. I don't really care. I just didn't want you to misunderstand." "I won't misunderstand." I patted her shoulder, my smile warm and steady. After sending off a thoroughly constipated looking Mia, I went to find Ethan. "Ethan, there is something I want to mention." I sat across from his desk, my tone calm and sincere. "I completely believe there is nothing between you and Mia. You don't need to worry about that. But people at the office are already whispering about you too. You know how it is. That kind of gossip is bad for your professional image, and even worse for a young woman's reputation. Plus, if it gets back to Liam, that is an awkward conversation, right? So maybe just keep a little more distance at work." When Ethan heard that people were talking about him and Mia, a flash of guilt crossed his eyes, but when he heard me say, "completely believe," that guilt was swiftly replaced by relief. He reached over and took my hand, putting on the face of a husband deeply moved by his wife's trust. "Raven, thank you for being so understanding. You are right. I'll be more careful. It is just that Liam keeps asking me to mentor Mia, so I've been keeping her close to show her the ropes." I fought the urge to yank my hand away. His palm was warm, but all I felt was bone, deep, cold, no matter. He'd be a cold corpse soon enough. The next day at noon, Liam appeared right on schedule in the company lobby. He wore a perfectly tailored navy suit, flashed an easy smile, and walked with the confident stride of a textbook successful businessman. He strode over to Ethan's area, and in front of every employee, said in a casual, brotherly tone, "Ethan, my pain in the neck little sister's been interning here. She hasn't been giving you any trouble, has she? If she is slacking off, you call her out. Don't go easy on her just because of me." A collective light bulb went off across the office. So that is why the boss had been giving the pretty intern special treatment. She was the business partner's sister. Suddenly, every rumor and piece of gossip had a perfectly reasonable explanation. The whispers died instantly. This was, of course, a performance Ethan had carefully orchestrated. He'd had Liam come in and publicly claim Mia's identity to shut everyone up. What Ethan didn't know was that Liam had been fully aware of his affair with Mia all along. Not just aware, he'd directed the entire thing. That earnest, entrusting my sister to my buddy expression on Liam's face was just another, deeper layer of disguise. And because Ethan felt guilty about his relationship with Mia, he believed he was sleeping with his best friend's sister behind his back. He'd been saying yes to every favor Liam asked without hesitation. Those favors all seemed small, but each one was laying the groundwork for the real trap. Mia's great, sharp learner, no trouble at all. Ethan clapped Liam on the shoulder, a barely perceptible note of guilt in his voice. "Good to hear, good to hear." Liam put on a relieved expression, then pivoted. "Hey, Ethan, you free for lunch? I'd love to buy you a meal. There is something I want to run by you. Of course, let's go." They went to a quiet Italian restaurant near the office. I didn't follow, but my pie was there. High-sensitivity recording equipment captured every word of their conversation in crystal clarity. On the recording, Liam was silent for a long time before letting out a heavy sigh, his voice thick with reluctance. "Ethan, honestly, I've been asking you for favors so much lately that I am embarrassed. But you are the only person I can turn to. Bro, come on. Don't be like that. Just tell me what you need." Ethan's tone was generous and expansive. Liam sighed again, as if steeling himself. "Here is the thing. I've got my eye on a new media investment opportunity. The returns look incredible, but I am short on liquid capital. So, I was wondering if you could lend me some. The moment the money comes back, I'll pay you back with interest." "How much?" $1 million, $1 million. For a mid-sized creative marketing agency like Ethan's. It wasn't pocket change, but it wasn't crippling either, especially after I'd injected that massive trust fund years ago. The company's cash flow had been healthy, and Ethan was still carrying the guilt of sleeping with his buddy's sister. This loan, in his mind, was partly psychological compensation. "No problem. I'll have finance wire it over." Ethan agreed without blinking. "Ethan, I can't thank you enough." Liam's voice brimmed with gratitude. "I promise I won't let you down." That evening, the Pi sent the recording to my encrypted email. I sat in the study with headphones on and listened to it twice. $1 million, just the appetizer. If I didn't intervene, Liam and Mia, that parasitic duo, would eventually strip the company down to its skeleton. But I wasn't in a rush, because compared to the financial losses, the changes quietly taking place inside Ethan's body were the real endgame of this chess match. That afternoon, Ethan didn't return to the office. The Pi's real-time surveillance report showed he'd gone to Mia's studio apartment on the east side. To thank him for lending money to Liam, Mia pulled out every trick in her book to show her gratitude. They stayed in that apartment all afternoon, curtains drawn, not leaving until dusk. That night, Ethan dragged himself home, exhausted. In the early days, he'd come back from Mia's place, carrying at least a trace of guilt. He'd bring me flowers, or suggest a weekend getaway to that lakeside town. I loved. Every one of those sudden gestures of affection was, to my eyes, a smoking gun. But, as time went on, as I demonstrated my unconditional trust again and again, his guilt faded, the flowers stopped, the weekend plans disappeared. He'd come home, collapse on the couch, scroll his phone, and grow increasingly indifferent to my existence. My trust had emboldened him, made him believe he could get away with it forever. What he didn't know was that every night, lying beside him with my eyes closed, the image playing in my mind was his funeral, and I was the sole surviving widow. The change began on an ordinary Tuesday morning. Ethan sat at the breakfast table. I'd prepared his meal with care. Whole wheat toast, avocado, poached eggs, and a glass of fresh squeezed orange juice. But he just poked at it with his fork a couple of times and set it down. "What is wrong? Not feeling well?" I asked with concern. "It is nothing. My stomach's just been off lately." He frowned, pressing a hand against his abdomen. "Probably all the client dinners, too much drinking." My heart sank. No, my heart soared. The curse had begun. But my face showed only worry. "Maybe you should see a doctor?" "Nah, it is probably just acid reflux." Ethan waved it off. "I'll pop some antacids." The eternal affliction of the American male. They'll stay up all night for a playoff game, pull 80-hour weeks for a pitch deck, but ask them to see a doctor. "You'd have better luck getting them to admit," they cried during Faithy Notebook, Faye in their dictionary. Going to the hospital equals admitting weakness, the ultimate assault on masculinity. I am screaming at the accuracy here. Raven didn't even need to use magic. She just weaponized his own fragile male ego. Men will literally harbor a mutating stage. 4 tumor in their gut and be like, "Nah, babe, it is just the IPA from last night." Raven playing the doting, oblivious wife while feeding him warm butternut squash soup as he actively rots from the inside is top-tier villainy. She killed him with kindness, literally. It's a brilliant reminder. Sometimes the best revenge is just stepping back and letting a man's own stubbornness do the heavy lifting. And I, of course, would not push him. Instead, I leaned even harder into the devoted wife role. I scoured the internet for stomach, friendly recipes, and cooked him gentle meals every day. Warm butternut squash soup, creamy oatmeal, perfectly steamed cod with seasonal vegetables. Babe, your cooking's been amazing lately. One evening, after finishing a bowl of bone broth, I'd simmered for 3 hours. Ethan actually paid me a compliment. Your stomach's been bothering you. Of course, I am going to take care of you. I smiled tenderly and ladled him another bowl. The food did ease his discomfort somewhat, reinforcing the illusion that it was nothing serious, just something that would clear up on its own, which meant he'd be even less inclined to get a proper checkup. The truth was, even if he went now, it wouldn't change a thing. This wasn't an ordinary stomach condition, it was the curse made manifest. Once triggered, it was irreversible, beyond the reach of any modern medicine. It would progress at its own pace, eroding his body step by step until there was nothing left. The only reason I didn't want him finding out early was to deny him time to prepare, to transfer assets, change his will, or come after me again. Days passed. Ethan's stomach pain grew more frequent, his appetite worse. He was visibly wasting away, his complexion shifting from a healthy tan to an unnatural waxy yellow. But he stubbornly refused to see a doctor, instead ordering every over-the-counter stomach medication he could find online and popping them by the handful. He blamed everything on work stress and irregular eating. During this time, his affair with Mia continued, just less frequently. His body simply couldn't keep up anymore. Mia wasn't happy about it. But Ethan no longer had the energy to placate her. Finally, one night, Ethan was jolted awake by a violent wave of stomach pain. He rushed to the bathroom, hunched over the toilet dry, heaving until he finally coughed up, liquid streaked with dark red. He stared at the blood in the bowl, face white as a sheet. He was finally scared. "Raven, Raven." His voice carried a terror I'd never heard before. I, startled, awake, rushed into the bathroom and found him crouched on the floor, eyes wide with panic. "What happened?" I knelt beside him, gripping his shoulders, voice thick with urgency. I am coughing up blood." His voice was shaking. "We're going to the hospital right now." My tone left no room for argument. At this stage, I no longer cared whether he went to the hospital. Everything that needed to happen had already happened. The cancer cells had been rampaging through his body long enough. Going now would only confirm the devastating truth. And that truth was exactly what I needed. The fluorescent lights in the hospital corridor were cold as a scalpel. I sat in the waiting area on a plastic chair, holding a vending machine coffee that had long gone cold, wearing the expression of a wife anxiously awaiting her husband's test results. Inside, I was still as a millpond. Ethan underwent the full battery, endoscopy, Connecticut scan, tumor markers. It took most of the day. When the attending physician called us into his office, holding a stack of reports, his expression grave. Ethan's hands were already trembling uncontrollably. "I am sorry," the doctor said, removing his glasses and rubbing the bridge of his nose. His voice was heavy and clinical. The results show a malignant gastric tumor, and it is already advanced. The cancer has metastasized to multiple sites. In that instant, the air in the room turned to concrete. Ethan looked like he'd been struck by invisible lightning. He sat rigid in his chair, lips moving but producing no sound. His eyes were wide, his pupils reflecting a world in collapse. That is impossible. His voice was hoarse and fractured. I am barely in my 30s. How can it be advanced? It was just an upset stomach. The doctor sighed. Early, stage gastric cancer often presents with minimal symptoms. It is easily overlooked or mistaken for common gastritis or ulcers. By the time symptoms become pronounced, it is usually already. He paused. We'll develop an aggressive treatment plan, chemotherapy, and targeted therapy, and do everything we can to manage the progression. Manage. Ethan seized on the word, a thread of desperate hope in his voice. So, it can't be cured. The doctor was silent for several seconds. We will do everything in our power. But I have to be honest with you, given the current situation, the chances of a cure are very low. With aggressive treatment, we can extend survival time and improve quality of life. Ethan said nothing more. He sat there like a man whose soul had been extracted, staring blankly at some invisible point. I reached over and took his hand at just the right moment. Eyes glistening, voice choked. Ethan, don't be scared. No matter what, I'll be right here with you. We'll fight this together. There is always hope. The perfect image of a devoted, loving wife. Ethan turned to look at me, and tears suddenly spilled from his eyes. He gripped my hand like a drowning man clutching a life raft. Raven, his voice cracked. I gently patted his back. The slight upward curve of my lips was hidden perfectly by his face buried in my shoulder. Of course, he wouldn't connect this to the curse I'd told him about. He'd never taken that seriously, probably forgotten it entirely. In his worldview, curses were as absurd as fairy tale witches. Even if some dim memory surfaced, he'd chalk it up to a terrible coincidence. After all, who would actually believe that an ancient family oath could determine whether a man lived or died? Back home, Ethan locked himself in the study and didn't come out all night. Through the crack in the door, I could hear muffled sobbing and the sound of things being thrown. From that day on, Ethan's mood became violently unstable. He'd explode over the smallest things, sweep dinner off the table, scream obscenities at doctors and nurses over the phone. "What is the point of treatment?" he shouted at me, eyes bloodshot. "I am going to die anyway. What difference does a few more years make? Being tortured by chemo every day. I'd rather just be dead." I didn't argue. I quietly picked up the broken dishes, then brought him a fresh bowl of warm congee. "If you won't fight for yourself, at least think about the company," I said calmly. "If you go down now, what happens to everything you've built?" That sentence hit the bullseye. The thing Ethan cared about most, his business, his wealth, his empire. He was silent for a long time. Then he gave in, not because he wanted to live, because he couldn't stand to lose everything. Chemo began. The side effects hit fast and hard. Violent nausea, vomiting, hair loss, crushing fatigue. The man who'd once been a sharp-suited, swaggering business titan was reduced in weeks to a gaunt, ashen shell. And I, naturally, stepped in to take over the company. I called an emergency meeting with all department heads. Dressed in a crisp black suit, I stood at the head of the conference table and swept my gaze across every face in the room. Every own. My voice was steady and commanding. "You are all aware of Ethan's condition. He needs to focus entirely on his treatment. Effective immediately, all day. Today operations and decisions will be handled by me. No one objected. The company was Ethan's sole proprietorship. No outside shareholders, no board of directors. And I, as his legal wife, the company's largest capital contributor, and a member of the advisory board, it was unassailable. The first thing I did with my new authority was fire Mia. The day Mia was terminated, she still didn't know Ethan had been diagnosed with late-stage stomach cancer. In her mind, Ethan was just feeling under the weather and needed some rest. She assumed her safety net was still firmly in place, that Ethan would have her back, like always. So when HR handed her a politely worded but firmly positioned termination letter, she was blindsided. "This is impossible. On what grounds are you firing me?" Mia's voice was shrill enough to crack the ceiling. HR replied without expression. "The company is undergoing a workforce restructuring. Your internship performance did not meet the standards for conversion to full-time. This is a routine personnel adjustment." Mia, of course, wasn't buying it. She called Ethan's phone frantically over and over, but every time she got nothing but cold voicemail. At that moment, Ethan was lying in a chemo suite, tubes running in and out of his body, too weak to lift his hand, let alone answer a phone. And I'd already switched his phone to Do Not Disturb under the pretext of letting him rest and heal, whitelisting only my number and the medical team. Unable to reach Ethan, Mia completely panicked. She waited for me in the coffee shop downstairs for an entire afternoon. When I walked out of the building after work, she blocked my path. Her makeup was ruined, eyes swollen. But what burned in those eyes wasn't sadness. It was the recklessness of someone with nothing left to lose. "Raven, we need to talk." I looked at her. "Fine." We sat by the window. Mia took a deep breath, as if she'd finally decided to rip off every mask, and looked me dead in the eye, enunciating every word. "Raven, I am done pretending. I'll tell you the truth. Ethan and I have been together for a long time. We're in love. So you have no right to fire me." When she said it, her chin tilted up slightly, radiating the smugness of someone who believed she was the one he truly loved. I picked up my latte, took a leisurely sip, set the cup down, and let a faint smile curl across my lips. I know, 2 words, light as air. But they detonated like a depth charge, blasting every expression off Mia's face. "What?" Her eyes went wide. I said, "I've known all along." My tone was as calm as a weather report. "From the very first time things got flirty between you two, I hired a private investigator to tail you. Every date, every hotel room, every suggestive text. I have it all on file. Those little stunts you pulled in front of me, the coffee spill, the fake ankle twist, the innocent act. I saw through every single one. I just couldn't be bothered to call you out." Mia's face went white as chalk. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. I continued, unhurried, "And that is not even the half of it." I pulled a manila envelope from my bag and slid it across the table. Mia opened it with trembling hands and pulled out the photos. The first one, a high-definition shot of Liam leaving her apartment late at night. The second, a close-up of the 2 of them making out in his car in the parking garage. The third, the fourth, the fifth. Each one a razor, sharp blade, slicing through every lie she'd ever woven. Mia's hands shook violently. Photos slipped from her fingers and scattered across the table. "You and Liam share 0 blood relation. You are the daughter his stepmother brought into the family." My voice went cold. Each word landing like a verdict being read. You've been carrying on an illicit relationship, and your appearance in Ethan's life was orchestrated entirely by Liam. The two of you have been conspiring from day one, using Ethan as a cash cow, with plans to bleed the company dry. How could you possibly know all this? Mia's voice had changed pitch entirely. Fear surged up from the depths of her eyes like a rising tide. Her first instinct wasn't to deny it. It was terror. Terror that Ethan already knew. Terror that everything she and Liam had built was about to collapse. Number, that is not true. You are making this up. You fabricated the evidence. She finally snapped back to reality and launched into hysterical denial. I didn't argue. I just smiled faintly. Whether it is fabricated or not, you know the truth. The photos and recordings are all there. They'll hold up under any scrutiny. I stood, picked up my bag, and looked down at this thoroughly shattered young woman. Oh, one more thing. My tone turned almost offhand, as if I'd just remembered something trivial. Ethan has been diagnosed with late-stage malignant cancer. Even with aggressive treatment, he doesn't have long. So you see, the man you schemed so hard to steal, he'll soon be nothing at all. What? Mia looked like she'd been slapped across the face. She collapsed back into her chair, every drop of color draining from her skin. I didn't spare her another glance. I pushed through the coffee shop's glass door and stepped into the evening street. Behind me, Mia's muffled, suffocating sobs trailed off into nothing. But that was no longer my concern. After leaving the cafe, I got in my car and pulled up the contact info for Liam's wife, Harper. Because of Ethan and Liam's long partnership, Harper and I had connected early on. We'd cross paths at holiday gatherings, exchange pleasantries, but we were never close. She was a gentle, quiet woman, a full-time mom raising 2 kids, her trust in Liam almost blind. I'd never intended to cover for Liam and Mia. The timing just hadn't been right. I'd needed to stabilize things on Ethan's side first. No, every piece was in position. Time to topple the first domino. I compiled everything the pie had gathered, photos, recordings, surveillance logs, into an encrypted file, attached a brief explanation, and sent it to Harper. Less than 10 minutes later, Harper called. Her voice was shaking. But to my surprise, she didn't dissolve into hysterics. Instead, she asked with a composure pressed to its absolute limit, "Raven, is this all real?" "Every bit of it, Harper. Every photo, every recording. It all holds up." My tone was even and sincere. I discovered Liam and Mia's relationship while investigating Ethan's affair. I felt you had the right to know. A long silence on the other end. I could hear her rapid, controlled breathing, and in the background, the faint sound of children laughing. "Thank you, Raven." That was all she said. Then she hung up. I knew Harper would handle the rest. A betrayed wife armed with ironclad evidence is a force of nature. Say it louder for the people in the back. Liam and Ethan thought they were these corporate puppet masters, playing the women in their lives like pawns. But what happens when the pawns unionize? They share the Google Drive folder of receipts. I absolutely loved that Raven didn't bother fighting the pathetic little mistress. She went straight to the other wife. Never underestimate women who have been pushed to their absolute limit. We don't get hysterical. We get lawyers. Harper and Raven dismantling these men's lives over a casual text is the female solidarity we love to see. Mia's mess. I'd leave that for Harper to clean up. No, it was time to go to the hospital. Time to let Ethan know exactly what kind of people his most trusted brother and most cherished lover really were. When I walked into the hospital room, Ethan was propped up against the headboard, face waxy yellow, eye sockets sunken. Just a few weeks of chemo had ravaged him beyond recognition. The tall, confident man he'd once been now looked 20 years older. He saw me come in, and a complicated mix of emotions flickered through his eyes. Dependence, irritation, and a trace of wariness he couldn't quite name. I sat down by the bed, paused for a few seconds, then spoke. Mia came to see me today. My tone was flat, like I was delivering a business update. She laid her cards on the table, said you two have been together for a long time. Ethan's body went rigid. His first reaction was anger, not guilt over the affair, but fury at Mia for disobeying him. Hadn't he told her 1,000 times to never let me find out? That stupid woman couldn't keep her mouth shut, but the anger was quickly overtaken by deeper dread. He was lying in a hospital bed, hanging by a thread, the company running solely on my shoulders. If I turned on him over the affair, he'd lose his last lifeline. So he switched masks from rage to remorse. He extended a skeletal hand, trying to grasp mine, his voice hoarse and pleading. Raven, I am sorry. I made a mistake. I couldn't resist the temptation. I am sorry, can you? Forgive me this once. The way I am now, you are all I have left. His eyes reddened, tears sliding down his hollowed cheeks. The old me, the previous life's me, might have softened at the sight. But now, watching his tears, all I felt was irony. This man, in my previous life, had tampered with my brakes to keep me from taking half his assets. He'd sent me off a bridge to my death. Now he was crying and begging for forgiveness, only because he still needed me. Actually, I've known all along, I said calmly. Ethan's tears stopped dead. Shock replaced them. What? From the moment things started between you two. I hired a pie. I know everything. I didn't give him time to process. I pulled the investigation report on Liam and Mia from my bag and placed it on his hospital bed. But compared to your affair, I think you need to see this. Ethan opened the report with trembling hands. Page 1. A timeline and photos of Liam entering and leaving Mia's apartment late at night. Page 2. High-definition shots of the two of them in intimate contact inside a car in the parking garage. Page 3. Mia's true background, no blood relation to Liam whatsoever. She was his stepmother's daughter. Page 4. Communication records between Liam and Mia, obtained through the pie's technical resources, clearly showing that Mia's approach to Ethan was entirely orchestrated by Liam, designed to exploit Ethan's trust and emotions, gradually extract funds, and ultimately seize the company's core assets. Ethan turned the pages one by one, his hands shaking harder with each. His face shifted from waxy yellow to ashen grey, then from grey to a terrifying shade of purple. Red, his most trusted brother and his most beloved mistress, had played him for a complete and utter fool. The $1 million Liam borrowed was never an investment. It was straight-up fraud. Every ounce of Mia's tenderness and adoration had been a meticulously rehearsed performance. Number, this can't be. Ethan's voice sounded like it was being wrung from the depths of his throat, raw and distorted. Liam wouldn't do this to me, Mia. She loves me. The evidence is right in front of you, Ethan. My voice held no warmth. Judge for yourself. Ethan stared at the photos, chest heaving violently. His breathing grew faster, heavier, like a cornered animal, with nowhere left to run. Then a spray of blood erupted from his mouth, splattering across the white sheets in a gruesome bloom. His eyes rolled back. He collapsed. The heart monitor screamed. Nurses and doctors flooded in, pushing me out the door. I stood in the corridor, watching the red emergency light above the door, my expression perfectly still. He wouldn't die. Not yet. The curse had given him 6 months, and the clock hadn't run out. But he would suffer, and that was exactly what I wanted. Ethan was resuscitated. But when he opened his eyes again, everything had changed. I was sitting in the chair beside his bed, scrolling through emails on my phone. Sensing he was awake, I looked up. Our eyes met. In that instant, I saw an extraordinarily complex cascade of emotions in his gaze. First confusion, then shock, then something close to unhinged fury. He lunged upright, ripping at the tubes and wires attached to his body, and threw himself at me, hands reaching for my throat. "Raven, why are you still alive? You are supposed to be." The words burst out of him, but halfway through, he choked, as if something had seized his throat and stopped dead. His eyes turned razor, sharp and bewildered, locked onto me like he was staring at a ghost that had no business existing in this world. And in that moment, my last shred of doubt evaporated. Ethan had been reborn too. Chef's kiss. This is the plot twist that took the story from a fun revenge fantasy to a psychological thriller. Revenge is just sparkling petty if the rat in the trap doesn't know why the cheese was poisoned. The fact that Ethan woke up with the memories of murdering her in the past life, only to realize he's now trapped in a decaying body while she holds all the cards. That's not just karma, darlings. That is premium, ad-free, high-definition karma. He got to marinate in his own helplessness. He remembered everything from the previous life. He remembered tampering with my car. He remembered me plunging off the overpass. He remembered believing he'd gotten rid of me forever. So when he woke up in this life, still riddled with cancer, with me sitting calmly at his bedside, his first reaction wasn't relief. It was fear and rage. But I felt no panic. If anything, I thought this was better. If he didn't remember the previous life, my revenge would have been a one-woman show he'd never understand. But he would know, with perfect clarity, exactly why he'd ended up here. That is the kind of revenge that truly satisfies. Fortunately, Ethan had been so ravaged by illness that he could barely stand, let alone hurt me. His lunge didn't even graze my sleeve before he collapsed at the edge of the bed. Too weak to go on. I didn't flinch, didn't call for a nurse. I just looked down at him, the way you'd watch a dying animal thrash in its final moments. Ethan glared up at me with the cold, venomous eyes of a snake. Teeth clenched. "My illness, does it have something to do with you?" "Why would you ask that?" I replied. "Because you told me." His voice was hoarse and savage. Every word ground out between his teeth. "Your family has an ancient curse. If a married man betrays the marriage, he'll be struck with an incurable disease, dead within 6 months." I let out a soft laugh. "So you finally remember." "Then why didn't you warn me this time?" Ethan screamed, his voice cracking with the strain, the effort pulling at his abdominal wounds until his face contorted in agony. I didn't answer right away. I rose slowly, walked to the window, drew the curtain back, just enough to let the afternoon sun spill in. Then I turned, backlit, and looked at the wrecked man on the hospital bed. "Warn you?" My voice was quiet, but every word was a poisoned needle. "In our last life, how many times did I warn you? Did you listen? Not only did you not listen, you called me delusional. You said I was paranoid. You said I was being unreasonable. When I showed you the evidence and asked for a divorce, you were so afraid I'd take half your assets that you cut my brake lines. When I went off that overpass, Ethan, do you know what I felt in those final seconds? My voice finally trembled, not from grief, but from a hatred suppressed across 2 lifetimes, finally finding its way out. Despair, not despair at dying, despair at you. I gave you 7 years of my life. I used every penny my grandmother left me to save your company, and you repaid me with murder." Ethan's body went rigid. His lips trembled. The fury in his eyes began giving way to something deeper, not guilt, fear. He finally understood. The woman standing before him was no longer the one who'd once cried and begged him to come back. So in this life, my lips curved into a smile he'd never seen before. I won't warn you, and I won't ask for a divorce. I'll just watch you walk, step by step, into the grave you dug for yourself. You, Ethan's eyes bulged as if they might fall from their sockets. You psycho. I laughed softly. You made the first move, Ethan. I am just finishing what you started. Then, like a switch had been flipped, Ethan's demeanor did a complete 180. The rage in his eyes melted into desperation, his voice taking on an almost groveling quality. Raven, if this is your family's curse, you must know how to break it, right? If you save me, I'll agree to anything. Divorce, half the assets, no, 2/3, please. He even tried to crawl off the bed to grab my hand. I stepped back, out of reach. First, once the curse is triggered, it is irreversible. There is no cure. My voice was calm and merciless. Second, even if there were, why would I save you? Do you honestly think I am generous enough to forget that you murdered me in our last life? And besides, I tilted my head slightly, as if pondering an interesting math problem. Think about it. If you die, I am your sole legal heir. The company, the properties, the accounts, the investments, all of it becomes mine. Why would I divorce you and settle for half? The last trace of color drained from Ethan's face. You can't do this. His voice sounded like shattering glass. We can start over. I can change. Start over, I laughed. But there was nothing behind my eyes. Ethan, heaven already gave you a second chance, and the first thing you did when you came back wasn't to reflect on what you'd done. It was to demand to know why I was still alive. You never once thought you did anything wrong. You are just bitter that you lost everything. A man like that, what makes you think you deserve a do? Over Ethan's mouth opened, but no words came. Because he knew every word I'd said was the truth. From that day forward, I stayed at the hospital around the clock. Not out of devotion, out of vigilance. Ethan had been reborn. He knew everything, which meant he could snap at any moment, contact a lawyer to change his will, move assets, or try to hurt me again. I wouldn't give him the chance. He did try. While I stepped out to use the restroom, he struggled to pick up the bedside phone and dial Liam's number. But his weakened fingers couldn't even hit the right keys. And besides, Liam was in no position to help anyone. Harper's counterattack was swifter and more devastating than I'd anticipated. She hired the most ruthless divorce attorney in the city, filed on grounds of infidelity and fraud, and demanded full custody of their shared assets and both children. Simultaneously, she blasted the scandal of Liam and Mia across social media and their entire social circle. Liam's business reputation collapsed overnight. Partners pulled their money, clients cancelled contracts, and his company spiraled into an unprecedented crisis. Mia and her mother were thrown out of Liam's father's house, penniless, with nothing. Ethan also tried to call for help during the doctor's rounds. He grabbed the physician's hand and screamed, "She is trying to kill me. She is hurting me. You can't let her stay here." The doctors and nurses exchanged bewildered glances, a terminal cancer patient accusing the wife who'd been at his bedside day and night, barely sleeping, of trying to harm him. No one believed him. The attending physician pulled me aside and gently suggested that Ethan's mental state might be deteriorating under the dual strain of the disease and chemotherapy. He recommended a psychiatric consultation. That night, Ethan was given a sedative and sank into a deep sleep. I sat beside his bed, studying his face, so emaciated it was barely recognizable, and felt not a flicker of pity. In the days that followed, Ethan's condition deteriorated at a pace that defied medical logic. The cancer cells ran wild, metastasizing to one organ after another. Liver, pancreas, lymphatic system. One by one, they fell. Chemo had completely lost its effect. The doctors were helpless. All they could do was administer high-dose painkillers to preserve whatever dignity he had left. Ethan lost nearly 40 pounds. His skin became paper, thin, the purple-blue veins visible beneath. His hair was completely gone, eye sockets deeply sunken, cheekbones jutting out sharply. He looked like a skeleton that was still breathing. He no longer had the strength to fight. Even speaking had become a struggle. Most of the time, he just lay there with clouded eyes, staring at the ceiling, lost in thoughts I'd never know. Occasionally, he'd turn his head to look at me. In that gaze, hatred, defiance, fear, but above all, a despair that went bone deep. He finally understood. All of it was real. The curse was real. The reckoning was real, and he would never get another chance to turn things around. On the last night of his life, the hospital room was so quiet that the only sound was the faint beeping of the heart monitor. Ethan's lips moved suddenly, producing a sound barely above a whisper. I leaned closer. Regret, just that one word. I didn't know what he regretted. The affair, the murder, or failing to make a different choice when he'd been given a second life. But it no longer mattered. At 3:17 a.m., the heart monitor emitted a single, long, monotone wail. The undulating green line went flat. Ethan was dead, carrying a chest full of agony, bitterness, and regret. He closed his eyes, for I stood beside the bed, looking down at his face, now utterly devoid of life, and was silent for a long time. Then I drew a deep breath in and slowly let it out. The boulder that had been crushing my chest for 2 lifetimes finally crumbled to dust. Ethan had no parents. His father had died of a stroke years ago. His mother even no siblings, no children. As his legal wife, I was his sole heir. The company, the properties, the bank accounts, the investment portfolio, everything was mine. When the attorney handed me the pen to sign the estate settlement documents, my hand was perfectly steady, justice served. A week later, Harper texted me. Divorce is finalized. Thank you, Raven, I replied. A fresh start. Everything's going to be okay. It wasn't a platitude. For Harper, leaving Liam truly was the beginning of something new and better. Harper ultimately secured the majority of Liam's marital assets and full custody of both children. Liam's company, battered by scandal and mass divestment, was insolvent and entering bankruptcy proceedings. He himself was under investigation for commercial fraud, including the $1 million he'd swindled from Ethan. As for Mia, after Liam's father kicked her and her mother to the curb, she lost every source of income. She tried posting a long, tearful essay on social media, casting Liam as the villain who'd used and abandoned her, packaging herself as an innocent girl deceived by a terrible man, fishing for sympathy. But Harper had already made the true nature of Mia and Liam's relationship public knowledge. The comments section was a wall of mockery and contempt. Nobody was buying what she was selling. The last I heard of Mia, she was waiting tables at a budget chain restaurant. Those hands, once adorned with flawless manicures, used only for holding coffee cups and flipping through fashion magazines, now carried heavy trays back and forth between a greasy kitchen and a noisy dining floor. I didn't gloat. Her ending was nothing more than the harvest of seeds she'd planted herself. Ethan's funeral was held on an overcast day. The turnout was thin. All those so-called business associates and drinking buddies had scattered like birds the moment he got sick. The only ones who showed up were a handful of long-time employees and a few distant relatives he'd barely known. I stood before the headstone in a black dress, holding a bouquet of white lilies. The pastor finished the eulogy. The small crowd drifted away. I stood there alone, reading the name and dates carved into the stone, silent for a long time. A breeze swept through, carrying the first cool breath of autumn, lifting a few dry leaves from the ground. I laid the lilies gently at the base of the headstone, straightened up, and gave that cold slab of stone one final long look. Ethan. My voice was barely a whisper, soft enough that only the wind could hear. What you owed me in the last life, I've collected in full in this one. Between us, the ledger is closed. I turned and walked toward the parking lot. My heels clicked against the gravel path, crisp, steady, resolute. Every step felt like a final goodbye to the past. At the car, I opened the door and slid into the driver's seat. Before starting the engine, I glanced at myself in the rearview mirror. The woman looking back had clear eyes, a calm face, and the faintest trace of a smile at the corners of her mouth. Not the smugness of a victor, but the quiet relief of someone who'd finally set down every burden, taking a deep breath and simply letting go. I started the car and pulled out of the cemetery. Outside the window, the sky, overcast all day, suddenly cracked open. A single beam of golden sunlight pierced through the heavy clouds and spilled across the road ahead. I turned on the stereo. A song came on at random. Asterisks no, here you go again. You say you want your freedom. Asterisk, I pressed the gas. The car merged smoothly into traffic. The road ahead was long, because from this moment on, my life was finally, truly my own. 3 months later, I sat by the floor, to ceiling windows on the top floor of the company, a steaming cup of Earl Grey in my hands, gazing out at the city skyline. Under my management, the company hadn't just survived Ethan's passing. It was thriving. I'd restructured the business lines, cut several chronically unprofitable projects, brought in 2 new strategic partners, and pushed quarterly revenue up 30% year over year. This company had once been saved with my money. Now it was finally truly mine. My phone buzzed. A message from Harper with a photo attached. In the picture, Harper stood on a beach with her 2 kids, all 3 of them beaming. Behind them, endless blue sky meeting, endless blue ocean. The message read, "Took the kids to San Diego for vacation. The sun is gorgeous and so is my mood. Dinner soon." I smiled and typed back, "Anytime." I set down my phone and turned. My gaze landed on a framed photograph on my desk. It was an old photo, slightly yellowed with age. In it, a silver-haired woman in a deep purple velvet gown sat in an ornately carved armchair, her expression both regal and kind. My grandmother. When I was very small, she'd told me about the ancient family legend. Back then, I thought it was just a bedtime story meant to scare children. It wasn't until my previous life that I learned it was no story at all. "Thank you, Grandma," I said softly. Outside the window, the sun was slowly sinking, painting the entire city in warm gold. I lifted The Earl Grey was smooth and lingering, like a hug that had been a very long time coming. Let's get real for a second, ladies. On the surface, this is a story about a mystical family curse. But if you strip away the supernatural elements, the curse is just a metaphor for the inevitable decay of a life built on lies, greed, and betrayal. Ethan didn't die because of some medieval voodoo. He died because his own selfishness blinded him to everything real and valuable in his life. He traded a loyal, brilliant wife, who literally funded his dreams, for a cheap ego boost, with an intern who was actively plotting to rob him blind. Men like Ethan always think they are the smartest guys in the room. They think our forgiveness is a given, and our trust is a weakness they can exploit. But what Raven did is what I want for every single one of you who has ever been made to feel small by a man's betrayal. She reclaimed her power by detaching. The moment she stopped trying to fix him, she won. She stopped being the crying victim on the overpass and became the CEO of her own destiny. The fact that she walked away at the end, not with a sinister smirk, but with a quiet sense of relief, is the ultimate victory. The opposite of love isn't hate, it is indifference. She didn't just inherit his money, she inherited her freedom. So, I have to ask you guys, what would you have done if you woke up tomorrow and found yourself back on the day you discovered your ex's betrayal? Would you warn him? Would you try to fix it? Or would you start quietly picking out a fabulous black dress for the funeral while letting him think he's getting away with it? Spill the tea in the comments below. You know, I'll be reading them with my own cup of Earl Grey. If you loved this story, hit subscribe, like the video, and send it to your bestie who needs a reminder of her own power. Until next time, stay sharp, protect your peace, and never ever settle for half. Bye, darlings.